Well, we're going to have some fun here and build a Tic Tac Toe game. And this is the official tutorial from reactjs.org. The thing with that tutorial is that, it's a little bit dated because we have some new APIs, for example, the hooks API that we can use with React. So that's why I created this tutorial. I wanted to try to build this game with hooks instead and show you that. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. Yeah, as I said, this is the official tutorial. So you can visit that tutorial on the link here. And also, I highly recommend you to read the great documentation because I won't show you every detail in React. I will show you how to build this game, but you should have some fundamental knowledge about React before taking this tutorial. And the documentation on the official site is really, really great. Who am I? I'm Thomas Weibenfalk. I'm a developer and designer from Sweden. I created a lot of premium courses, so I teach thousands of students all over the world. And I also have a YouTube channel that I quite recently started to put more focus on. So I create weekly videos there on front-end development and especially in React. So I highly suggest if you're interested in free stuff in React and front-end that you visit my channel. And I would love it if you support me and subscribe to my channel. You can also hook me up on Twitter, or if you want to check out my premium courses, you can do that on weibenfalk.com. All right. So this is the app that we're going to build. It's not going to have a lot of styling because I want to focus on the React part. So it's a board. It's a blue board where you take your turns here with the X and O's and you can play tic-tac-toe. And the neat thing is that we're also going to have a time travel function, and I'm going to show you that in a bonus video at the end, how to implement that one. And time travel is a good concept to show where we talk about immutability and why it's good to not mutate the state, because we can keep the old state and easily implement a time travel function. And the main components of the game is going to be these three here. We have the board, game, and the square. The heavy lifting is going to be in the game component where all the logic is, and the other ones will be, as they call them, presentational components. I'm also going to have a helpers.js file with a function that will calculate the winner. And this is actually the original function from the original tutorial. So this is nothing that I've done. I've just provided this here, but I'm going to explain this one for you in a future video in the course here. So don't worry, we'll get to that later. So it's a nice little game and it's a good practice in React. So I hope you enjoy this course because I surely did that when I created it. All right, the first thing I ever do when I create a React application is to create the structure of it. I kind of create skeleton components that are empty just to know the structure of the application. So that's what I'm going to do now. For starters, we have the index file that is just reading the app component and showing it in the root div. And the app component is going to show the game component that we're going to create. And I like the structure where I have a components folder, and inside that folder, I'm going to create my components. So let's begin by creating a new folder, components, like that. And inside of that folder, I create a new file that I'm going to call board.js, and another file that is called square.js, and a third file that is called game. You can see that these are in that folder now. And I'm going to scaffold out these components. So first the board, I import React from React. And for now, I'm just going to create an arrow function. You can, of course, use regular functions if you're more comfortable with that. I always use arrow functions because I like them. And this one is called board. And for now, I'm just going to return a div with board inside of it. Like so, and I export default and the board. Right, and I can actually copy this and I move inside the game component. Paste it, I change this out. Game instead, save it, and then the square, and I change this out. Square. So that's the scaffolding of these components. I also will have to import the game component inside of the app component. So up here, import game from /components and game. You don't have to type out .js, it will know this by default. And then instead of Tic Tac Toe, we're going to show the game component. And if you know the basics of React and JSX, you know that this is JSX that will display the game component. So I save the file, and as you can see, it changes now and show game. And that's great because that's inside of the component here. And we can see if I change this one to Tic Tac Toe game and save it, it will update and say Tic Tac Toe game. Okay, so that's the scaffolding of the components. In the next video, we're going to flesh out the square component and also talk a little about destructuring. All right, we're going to create our square component in this video. And let's start by creating parentheses here, because I'm moving this one to its own row to get a little bit more structure here. So this is an arrow function, so it's an implicit return. We don't need to have a return statement here. So we're starting with the smallest component, that is the square. Then in the next video, we're going to create the board and then the game. So I'm going to replace this div with a button. And for this one, we're going to add styling also in a future video. And we're going to have an on-click handler also on this one. So on-click, and as you can note here in React, the on-click looks a little bit different than in regular HTML because it's using camel casing here. So that's really important to notice with React. Okay, and we're going to give this a prop that's called on-click also. All right, then inside of here, we're going to have a value. And we close this one just like a regular HTML element. But don't be fooled here. This looks like HTML, but it's really JSX. And JSX is something that I think you should read about at the reactjs.org site, because it's really important when you create stuff with React. You don't need to use JSX, but everybody is using it because it will make your life a lot more easier if you use JSX in React. Okay, so let's talk about props. React is heavily based on state and props are read-only. You can't change them, and you specify them just up here as in a regular function. You can specify props like this. And as you can see here, I haven't put props in front of it here. I can do that like this. And this is if you don't destructure out your props. Props is a regular JavaScript object that will have your values that you send down to the component. So for example, in this case, the props will look like an object, and we have the on-click. That is going to be some function. For now, I can just return function like that. And then we have the value. That is going to be maybe an X in this case, all right? So this is how the props object look, and you can destructure out this with ES6 syntax. And destructuring is heavily used in the React world. So if we want to grab, for example, the value here, we can do it like this. Like so, and this will destructure out, of course, should have a const there. And this is how you destructure out stuff from an object. So this will grab the value, and you don't have to type in props.value. You can access the value directly like this. So we can destructure out the props here. And actually, I'm going to remove this now, because now you've seen how you do it. And I want you to try to destructure out these props yourself before I show you how to do it. Okay, hope that went well for you. I'm going to show you how to do it now. And you destructure out it by curly braces, because this is an object, and we have the value, and we have the on-click like this. And we can remove the props here like so. So this is how you destructure out the props in a React component. And this is really handy because you don't want to type in props dot all the time. Okay, we're going to style this component in a future video, but for now, this is enough. This is the square component. It's the base of it. So we're going to do some slight modification to it later, but not in this video. In the next video, we'll move on and create the board component. All right, we're moving on here, and we're going to create the board component in this video, so let's get to it. Just as before, I create parentheses here and put these ones on their own row instead, because I want some structure in my components. And for this one, we're going to keep this div as a wrapper div, like so. And inside of here, we're going to return a square component. But first, we have to import it up here. Import square. That's the one that we created in the previous video. And we import it from ./square, like so. And then we're going to have a square inside of here. Actually, we're going to have 9 of them. I'm just going to create 9 squares manually, but we'll change this later when we're going to loop through all the squares and create them programmatically. So we have the square, and we're going to give it a value, because if you remember, we created the value prop in the square in the last video, so it wants a value. So we can just give it the value. Yeah, don't need the curly braces now. We give it the value 1. And it also has an on-click handler. And the board is going to get the on-click handler by props also. So we're just sending along this one to the square. And this is what you call prop drilling in React. And I'm not going to dig deep into that now and explain why it's not good in some cases, because that's a more advanced topic. So for now, we are going to be fine with this prop drilling. And we're also going to call this function with an argument. So we have to have an inline function here and call the onClick prop that we're going to create here soon. And we're going to have the iterator here, a different number for each square later on. But for now, we can just give it, dummy value like this, because we don't have that function yet. Close this one, and in this case we can self-close it, because we're not going to have anything inside of this, because we're not going to wrap anything inside of this. So for now, this is our board component, but we have to also specify the props. And I want you to yet again do this before I show you how to do it. I want the destructor props for this one, and that is going to be a prop that's called squares, and also a prop that's called onClick. So try that out yourself now. Try to destructure them in this component, and I'll show you how to do it after that. Okay? Hopefully that went well for you. Just as before, we have curly braces, and we have the squares. This is an array that we're going to give this component later. And also the onClick function like this. And we're also going to give this component some styling in the next video. But for now, this is enough. I'm going to take this row here and copy it and paste it in 8 times so that we have 9 squares. I'm just going to change this number here. And this is of course not good to repeat it like this, but we will use a loop later on and create this programmatically. Okay, so save this one. We're not seeing anything in the browser yet, so we have to fix that also. So let's move inside of the game component. I'll import the board. Import board from ./board, because it's in the same directory. So just a dot and a /. All right. So that's our board. And this game component is going to be the heart of our application. So we're going to have a lot of logic in it. That's why I have curly braces here. We can't do an implicit return. So we'll have a return statement instead here. And I'm going to return the board. And for now, I'm just giving it the onClick handler that we're going to scaffold out just in a second. handleClick like this. We're also going to give it the squares later on, of course. We're just going to scaffold out the functions that we need in this component. So we have the handleClick. I'm using an arrow function. As I said before, we can just keep it empty now. You can use regular functions if you want to do that instead. Then we're going to have a function in this component that we call jump2, like this. And the last one is going to be a function that we call renderMoves, like so. And I save this file, and hopefully it will work. And it doesn't work, of course. It's always like this when you code some stuff, but it should be like this. You will have errors when you code. So I'm going to keep this in to show you that this is just natural. Okay, so we have something wrong here with the handleClick. Everything here seems to be fine in the board. Yeah, I can see it now. This one should be camel cased. So I changed this one to a capital C, and I save it, and I bet it will work now. And it does. We have no error. And of course, it won't work now because we haven't created something inside of our onClick handler, but we'll fix that in a later video. In the next video, we're going to create some styling. It's not going to be much styling because I want to focus this tutorial on React stuff, but it will at least be a board that we can use to play the game. We're going to apply some simple styling to our board and our squares. And we'll begin with a square component in this video. And in React, you can create styling. You can have a regular style sheet that you import in your React components, or you can create styles with something that's very popular that's called styled components. I use it a lot in my applications, but I'm not going to use that in this tutorial because I don't think that styling is the main part of this tutorial. So I'm going to use a basic way of apply stylings in React, and that is you can create a regular JavaScript object where you have your styles and you send it into your component by a prop that's called style. It's a default prop in React you can use to apply styling. So first of all, I'm going to create a style object. So const style equals a JavaScript object. And for this one, I set the background to light blue. And please note that this is not CSS that we write here. So I cannot make a semicolon here. It has to be a comma because this is an object. And also all the properties in the CSS is going to be camel cased here because it's, as I said, a JavaScript object. It's not CSS. So we have a border of 2 pixels, solid dark blue. I set the font size, and as you can see here, if this was regular CSS, I would have typed it like this. But this is an object, so you have to use camel casing. Maybe 30 pixels. Comma. I set the font weight to 800. I want the cursor to be a pointer. And outline equals to none. So this is my style object that I'm going to apply to the button inside of here. And how do I apply it? Well, we have this default prop that is called style. And I simply send in my style object like this. So I save the file. So as you can see, the style is being applied here. And I encourage you to play around with this. You can change these values here and just pause the video and try it out for yourself. But this is the end of this video. In the next video, we're going to style the board component. All right, we got some nice little blue squares here. So now we're going to style the board itself to make them line up properly in the board. So I'm in the board component, and just as before, I'm creating a style object. So const style equals an object. And I set my style properties here. Border, it's going to be 2 pixels, solid, dark blue. No, I'm actually going to set it to 4 pixels, I think. I want to kind of a thicker border around the board itself. Okay, a comma, because this is an object. It's easy to forget this when you create CSS in an object like this. We set the border radius. And just as before, I have camel casing, not the regular border radius as in CSS. That will not work. So border radius. I set that one to 10 pixels. I set the width of the board to, I think, 250 pixels will do good. And the height is also going to be 250 pixels. I set the margin to 0 and auto. This will center the board in the browser. I want to display it as a grid. And the CSS grid is really, really good to work with in an example like this, because we can very easily create a 3x3 board. So I display it as a grid, and then I set the grid template. And it's here the magic will happen. With grid, we can use something that's called repeat. And I want this one to repeat 3 times, and I set it to 1 fragment. And the fragment is going to be relative to what you are displaying. And I won't go into explaining how CSS grid works, but if you haven't looked at CSS grid, I really, really advise you to do that, because it will help you a lot in situations like this. I divide it with a / here, and I do the same 3 and 1 fragment, and this will create a 3x3 board. And now I hope you remember from the last video how I applied the style. So pause the video now and try to apply the style yourself. It should be on the outer div here on the board. Okay, I'll show you now how to do it. So we have this style prop that is default in React, and I just send in my style object. I save the file, and as you can see, we have the board here. So that's how easily you create a board like this with CSS grid. If you want to try all this CSS stuff out and change something, maybe change the board to 150 pixels, you can see that it gets smaller. Just pause the video now and try out yourself and try to play a little with these values here and see what happens. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little about the function that is going to help us to calculate the winners before we actually implement all the game logic that we need. Okay, so we're soon going to start to create the logic for the game. But first, I just want to explain the calculateWinner function. And that one, as I said in the beginning of this tutorial, I copied this straight off from the original tutorial on the reactjs.org site. So I haven't made this function, but I think actually it's great because in all its simplicity, it works great to calculate the winner of the game. So in the helpers.js file, we have this function that's called calculateWinner, and it will take the squares as an argument. And the squares is the board, it's the current board state that we have. So we're going to send that one into this function. And then we have something that's called a lookup array here. And a lookup array contains all the winning moves. So it has 8 of them, I think, 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, 8 of them. And this is all the winning combinations that you can have. And do remember that this is array indexes. The square that has the 1 here becomes 0 here, and the square that has a 2 is the 1, and a 2 is the 3. So this is the first row in the board. And obviously, if we, for example, have excess on all these 3, we have won the game. Or if it's the O's, of course, also. And 3, 4, 5, it's the 4, 5, 6 in the board. And 6, 7, 8 is the 7, 8, 9. Then we have the 0, 3, and 6. And that will become 1, 4, and 7 on the board. The 1, 4, 7, 2, 5, 8. And the 2, 5, 8, 3, 6, 9. And then we also have 2 more because we can also win if we have 3 in a row diagonally. So 1, 5, and 9, and 7, 5, and 3 are also winning moves. So this is a lookup array, and instead of looping through a board, we're going to loop through this lookup array. So that's what we're doing here in the for loop. And the first line here in that loop, this is regular ES6 destructuring. What they are doing here is that they destructure out these values and they give them names A, B, and C. So this will become these values here, and we can easily access them. And then in our array, we are using these values, and these values are, as I said, the indexes that are the winning moves. So first we check if we have a player move, if we have an X or an O, on the first position. If we don't have that, we don't have to continue this one because, obviously we don't have a complete row down, so we can just return null. Otherwise, we check if the first value equals to the second value and if the first value equals to the third value here. If these match, we know that we have a winning row, so we return the symbol from, in this case, the A. We could have used the B and C also, because it's going to be the same character. It's an X or an O in our case in this game. Otherwise, we return null, because then we don't have a winner. And I actually created this const squares here that has a little test array that you can use to try this out yourself. And this represents a board. So the first row doesn't have any values. And in this case, I have 2x and 1 O in the middle row. And the last row doesn't have any values. And if I console log this out, you can see that it tells me null. We don't have a winner, but I can change this one to x and I save it. And you can see that x is the winner. You can change these values and see that you get the winner and that it actually calculates everything correctly here. So do that now. All right, I hope you had fun playing around with this and you totally understand now how this function works. And then we can move on and start creating the logic for the game. We're going to start creating the game logic now. And in this video, I'm going to create the different states. And we're also going to make sure that we render out the board correctly from our board array. And the states and everything that I'm going to create now is going to make a fully functional game. And then at the end, I'm going to show how to implement the time travel function as they also do in the original tutorial. But that's something that I'm going to add at the end to the game. So in a couple of videos, we're going to have a fully working game. All right, so let's get on with it. We're in the game component and I'm going to create 3 different states here. And actually, I also need to import useState. That's how you create a state in a functional component with hooks. You have a hook that's called useState. We create a const and we destructure out. In this case, it's going to be a board and set board. So we have our state value and we have the setter for the state here. And this is ES6 destructuring that we do here. And we call the useState hook. And in this case, I'm going to give it an empty array. Our board is going to be an array with 9 different elements. So we can create an empty array with array 9. And then we're going to fill it with null to start with, because it's an empty board to start with. So these values here are destructured out from the useState hook. So the return value of this useState hook is an array with 2 values that we destructure out here to make it easy for us to handle in our application. Otherwise, if we didn't destructure them out and, for example, just have a const board equals useState, and we have our state here, just a string now, state. Then for us to access the state, we do it with board 0. This is the state. And board 1 is going to be the setter for our state. And that's not very convenient to work with. So that's why we destructure them out and name them up here instead. So we don't have to grab them in the array like this all the time. All right. Then I'm going to create another state. X is next and set X is next. And I hope this is self-explaining what this one will do. It's true. We're going to start with the X player. So that's our 2 states. On every render I want to calculate, I want to check if we have a winner. So we can create a const winner. And we call our calculateWinner function that I showed you in the previous video. And we're going to give it the board. Of course, we also have to import it up here. So import calculateWinner from ... help us. This one is 1 directory up, so that's why I have double dots there. Okay, so that's our states and the const that's going to tell us if the move is a winning move or not. So we have our board component down here. And I want to give it the squares. And it's, of course, going to be the board. So that's the one, and I save this file, and it won't show anything now. But if we change this in our board component, because now I'm just manually rendering out 9 squares here, and this is going to be mapped out instead. So we have our wrapping div, then we have our squares. We already destructuring them out here. Squares, map, and we have a square and the eye, that's the index. And it's an arrow function inside of here. So I can just grab one square, paste it in there. And when we map through things in React, we need to set a key. In this case, we're going to use the index. It's usually not a good idea to use the index, but in this case, in this small game, I know that it's going to be fine, so we're using the index here. And the value, instead of this hard-coded value, it's going to be the square. That's the element we're currently on. And the onClick is going to send in the I. It's the index value. So I can remove these squares now. Save it. Maybe make it a little bit nicer also, like this. Strange, it should show us something here. We should have 9 squares. Yeah, I should have a return statement here, but we can actually make an implicit return. So I remove these curly braces and have parentheses here instead. 2 of them there, and save it. And there you go. So that's the full board, and that's great. In the next video, we're going to create the onClick function that will be the heart of the game, because that is going to do all the calculations for us when we make a move. Okay, we almost have a working game now. And in this video, we're going to create the handleClick function. And that is going to be the most important function in this game. Of course, every one of the function is important, but we're doing the logic here when we click a square, and it's going to do some calculations inside of that function. All right, so let's get to it. So inside a handleClick function in the game component, first, I want to create a copy of the board state, because we're going to actually mutate the state. So you should always make a copy and not mutate the state directly in React. So I create the const that I call board copy. Maybe that's not a good name. I don't know. You can name it to whatever you want. And we spread it. The spread operator here is something that's in the ES6 syntax in JavaScript. So it will do a shallow copy of the array. Please note that it is shallow. If you have a lot of objects and nested stuff in your state, it won't create a complete fully clone of your state. But in this case, it works because we have an array with 9 elements, so we can spread it and create a clone of that one, a copy of that one. So that's a board copy. Then, if user click an occupied square, or if game is won, then we just return. There's no need to do anything more in this function. So if winner, if that one is true, or if our board copy, and we access the index here that we clicked on, and if there's something in that square, we can just exit, because a user shouldn't be able to click on an occupied square. So we just return, and we do nothing more in this function. If we pass this check, we know that we have a new move. So first, put an X or an O in the clicked square. Right? And how do we do that? Well, we have our board copy, and we grab the square that the user have clicked on, and we do that by accessing the index here that we send in. And of course, we should also have the I up here, because we're sending along this with an argument to this handleClick function. So that's how we access the currently clicked square. Okay? Then we have a state that tells us if X is next or not. So we check if X is next. If X is next, we know that we should put an X in this square. Otherwise, we fill it with an O. So we have mutated the board copy array now with a new value. and then we can set the board state. And we do that by set board with a board copy. All right, and we also want to change X is next. So we have a setter for that one also, set X is next, and we just return the opposite value because this is a Boolean, and if we make an exclamation mark in front of this one, it will return the opposite value. So X is next. All right, this is the main logic that controls the game. Of course, the calculateWinner will do a lot of stuff for us, but this is all that we need to make this work. And in the next video, I'm going to create the JSX and make the game work. And after that, we're going to implement the time travel function. This is an exciting video because this one will make the game work. And we only have one thing to do after that, and that is to implement the time travel function. But this video will make the game playable. So let's get on with it. Down below here in the game component in the return statement, I'm returning the board here, so that's all fine. But we're also going to return some kind of display below the board that tells which turn it is. And we also have a start game button, and it's going to show buttons for the time travel later on. So I'm going to wrap this in a fragment, and a fragment is something you can create in React if you don't want to render out an actual element, but you have to wrap it in a fragment because you can only return one element in your JSX. So that's why I wrap it in this fragment. And a shorthand for the fragment is just an empty tag like this and a closing empty tag. Okay, so the board is all fine. And then I'm going to create another div. And for this div, I'm actually going to create 2 rows of styling up here at the top also. So I create the const styles equals an object. I set the width to 200 pixels. I set the margin to 20 pixels and order, and this will center it and give it some margin on the top and the bottom, like so. And you can, of course, play around with these values and see if there's some other value that you like much better than the values I choose for this one. So back down here in the div, I'm going to set the style prop to the styles I just created. Right, and then a closing div tag, and inside of this div tag I'm going to have a p tag, and I create curly braces because now I go inside the JavaScript land in the JSX. And I probably haven't mentioned that because when you're in JSX you use curly braces, and then you can create JavaScript expressions inside of your JSX. So I check if we have a winner, and then I want to display winner : plus winner. So this will tell us which one is the winner. Otherwise, if we don't have a winner, we can display next player : and we add some stuff here, and we're going to check if X is next. So if this is true, we return X. Otherwise, we return an O. So this is a quite long one. Something like that, I think. And we actually have 2 different turner operators here. A turner operator is the one I use here, where I check if this is the winner. Then you have a question mark, and it will return the thing that's to the right of the question mark if this is true. Otherwise, it will return the thing that's next to the colon, and that's going to be the next player. And then I have another turner operator here where we check if we should return an X or an O. You can do this in many different ways, of course. So this is one way of doing it. And instead of writing out my JSX just below here, I have created a function that's called renderMoves. So I'm going to call that one here. And this is just to make it a little bit more clean if I don't want to have that JSX here. Actually, I could just write it out here. It's not that much. But we have the renderMoves function here. And inside of that, I'm going to return a button. We have an on-click handler with an inline arrow function. We're going to set the board. And for now, we just restart the game. So I will create another empty array with 9 elements. I'm going to fill it with null. This is going to change when we have the time travel implemented later. And we can close the button there. And inside, we could type out start game. And we could actually make this an implicit return also. So change this once to parentheses and remove the return statement like this. Save it. And hopefully this game should work now. Can I make it a little bit bigger? Okay, X, O, X, O, X. Yeah, we have the winner X here. And I can restart the game. And we have the winner O. So the game is working now. It's a fully working game. And that's great. So that is all you need to have a fully working tic-tac-toe game with React hooks. But in the next video, we will also implement time travel. All right, we got a fully working game, but we want to make it fancier. And we're going to do that by implementing time travel. So where do we begin? Well, we are going to begin in the game component and create another state. And we're also going to rename these states a little bit, I think. So the board, I want to name this history instead and set history. Like that. And also I want to wrap this one in an array, because this one is now going to be an array with arrays. We are going to have more than one board in this array because we are saving the states so we can jump back and forth through the states. Okay, so very important, wrap this one in an array. So that's the history. Then we're going to create another state that we're going to call step number and set step number like that. And that equals a use state, and we start at 0. So this is going to be the actual state that we're on in the array, the actual step. Okay, so I think that is enough. No, we are going to change some more stuff here. We are going to change this calculateWinner function here, because now we are sending in the board and the board doesn't exist. So somehow we must send in the most recent step to this calculateWinner function. And we have our history array, and we also have a step number. So this one will give us the most recent step. Okay, so that's great. Then we have our handleClick. I'm going to create a new const that I call time in history. And from the state, I'm going to slice out the history that we don't need, because we can jump back and forth. And if we jump back in our state, we don't need to save the states that come after that, because we are going to have a completely different state because the user will make other moves. So we can wipe everything out from the step that we're actually on. So from our history, we slice out from the 0 and up to the step number. And we have to have +1 also. Otherwise, we won't get the most current state in this one. Okay, so that's the time in history. Then I'm going to create a const that I call current. This one is going to be time in history and the step number. So that's the most current move. And we can remove the board copy. And instead, I create a const that I call squares. And I spread the current. So that's the clone of the state that we are going to mutate. And this one can be the same, but down below here we don't have the board copy anymore. We renamed that one. So I renamed it to squares, and this can be the same. And we are going to do some different settings with the states here now. Set X is next is going to be the same. This one, I can remove that one. Now I want to set the history. And I'm going to spread the time in history because I want to keep that state, and I also want to give it the squares. That's the most recent state. So we have the time in history, and then we add another array with the most recent state. This can be a bit tricky to understand just like this, watching it one time. So I highly suggest that you play around with this yourself and pause the video later on to see how it works. Try to change stuff and just play around, and you'll probably get it if you don't get it the first time. Then we want to set a new step number. So we have the time in history dot length. That will give us the new step number because we add one array here and the length will increase with 1. So that will give us the next step number. And set x is next is going to be the same. Then we have a function that we call jump to, and that's going to be the one that we call from the button where we jump back and forth between the states. But first I want to change this renderMoves function. So we have the history and I want to map through that history. I make an underscore there because I'm not using the steps. I'm just going to use the move. And I have an inline arrow function like that. And inside here, I create a new const that I call destination. So this one is going to render out the buttons where we jump back and forth in time. So we have the move. And I can actually make backticks because this is a template literal. Go to move. And then in a template literal, you can grab a variable, a $sign and curly braces, and you create your expression inside of that one. Otherwise, we have go to start. So this will render out different buttons depending on what we've got here. So that's our destination. Then I want to return some JSX. And we're actually going to have our button. But I am going to place these ones in a list. And the key is going to be move. Because we're going to have a lot of the buttons now, not only one. So that's why I'm placing it in an li element. So I move this one up. Yeah, I remove these ones for now. So we have the button and we have the on-click handler. Instead of the set board, we're going to call jump to, and we're going to give it the move like so. And inside of the button, we're going to render out the destination. And we have a closing tag for the button like so. Then we just have to create the jump to function. And that one is going to set the step number to the step, because this one is going to have the step as a parameter. We're sending that one in here. And then we set x is next. And we have a modulo on this one, and it's going to change depending on what we've got there. So if this is 0, it sets it to true. Otherwise, it sets it to false. Okay, and I think this should be it. So I try to save it. And I have some arrow here. Yeah, it's down below here. We don't have the board anymore. We just have the history stayed. So we grab the current one from the history with the current step number. I save it. And there we go. Let's see if it works. No, it doesn't work. And why is that so? Yeah, and of course I have to change this one also. We don't have the board copy anymore. It should be named squares. Like so. And hopefully this works. As you can see here, we can jump back through the states. And it also calculates the winner. We can start the game again. And it works. So that's great. That's how you implement the time travel function in the Tic Tac Toe game. So this was quite a long video. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you like it, make sure to visit my YouTube channel, search for Weibenfalk, and make sure to subscribe. I put up tutorials there for free each week. Also, I have some premium courses out there on the internet. So just search for me and you will find me.